Hi there. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Arthritis Life Podcast, where we share arthritis life stories and tips for thriving with autoimmune arthritis. My name is Cheryl Crow, and I am passionate about helping people navigate real life with arthritis beyond joint pain. I've been living with rheumatoid arthritis for 20 years, and I'm also a mom, occupational therapist, video creator, support group leader, and I created the Room to Thrive self-management program. I am so excited to help you live a more empowered life with arthritis. We're going to cover everything from kitchen life hacks to navigating the healthcare system to coping with friends who just don't get it. Seriously, no topic is going to be off limits on this podcast. My interviewees and I share our honest stories of how chronic illness affects our lives. This includes discussions about mental health, sex, shame, pregnancy, body image, advocacy, self-acceptance, and so much more. You'll hear stories from all ends of the spectrum, from a person who's living in medicated remission from psoriatic arthritis to somebody living with severe mobility restrictions and severe pain from rheumatoid arthritis. You'll hear how people manage their conditions in different ways, like medications, mindfulness, movement, social support, work accommodations, and so much more. You'll also hear from rheumatology experts who just get it. We'll dive deep into the science behind chronic pain and what's the latest evidence for lifestyle changes that can help you thrive with arthritis, including exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress reduction, and more. This is your chance to sit down and chat with a friend who's been there. Ready to figure out how to manage your arthritis life? Let's get started. I'm so excited today to have Maggie Russell on the Arthritis Life Podcast. Welcome, Maggie. So happy to have you
there.
Here. Yay. Can you let everyone know quickly, this is a topical question because I know you just moved. Where do you live and what is your relationship to arthritis/chronic illness?
Sure. I now live in Nashville, Tennessee for the last week.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of, disagreement about where I live is actually Nashville or not. It's called Green Hills and
Okay.
it's its own thing, but it's not, it's still Nashville. So it's
Nice.
right on the kind of southern part of Nashville that goes into the suburb of Brentwood, which is where the most of the country music stars live.
That's exciting. And where are you from originally?
I grew up in Connecticut and then we moved to DC. And then I was sort of variety of places for school. And then I moved to Philadelphia. So I lived in Philly for 15, 16 years. And we were in Utah, which is where I started with you guys, and then got out of there. And now we're in Tennessee.
Wow. Oh, and I forgot the second part. What is your relationship to arthritis/chronic illness?
So my dad had axial spondylosis. Sorry, he had ankylosing spondylitis, which I didn't realize. We just knew it as his arthritis. So then when I got very sick, it took a while to figure out that I also had a sort of version of it, which is axial spondylitis, which is sort of the bigger umbrella, and then the ankylosing comes underneath that. So I have that. I have what I like to call old lady arthritis, which is just regular arthritis, just in my knees from running.
Yeah,
the
osteoarthritis. Yeah.
And chronic illness. So I am very mildly hypermobile, like part of the Ehlers-Danlos spectrum. I'm sort of all the way on the JV team of that. And that was sort of what was getting me into understanding connective tissue issues, which is, part of arthritis. And that process started me off understanding sort of chronic illnesses. And I also have symptoms consistent with sjogren's, like the biopsy that I've had is pretty much sjogren's. And then Raynaud's. And then I have migraines that are sort of drifting towards chronic migraine. Chronic migraine is actually 15 out of 30 days. And I don't have that. I have it about four days a month ish, unless there's storms. Did I nail all of that? I can't think of what else I have.
It's a lot. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a
vestibular migraine.
The vestibular migraines, and I mention this only because it was hard for me to figure out, and then I had to sort of lead some doctors in that direction. Vestibular migraines can happen. Your migraines can change after a bad illness. Mine changed after a really bad illness in April of 2023 from regular painful migraines to vestibular, which is really bad vertigo, very disorienting vertigo. You feel like you're falling down. And that's actually common, and it can happen to people after COVID. So if anyone
Yes.
listening all of a sudden is like, why am I not dizzy, but like literally I feel like I'm falling, that's something to go see a neurologist about.
I actually did that myself and it was so weird because the only time it was happening was precisely an hour after I would fall asleep. One day out of the week for a while, and then it kind of went to once every 2 weeks and then once a month, and then it just went away. But I would wake up feeling distinctly like I was falling, and it would be really panic inducing, but it wasn't. I've had panic attacks before, and it was not at all consistent with those because it wasn't occurring around any sort of like events, and it was always exactly an hour after I went to sleep. And we never figured out. The only correlation we can make to it was to COVID because it started immediately after my first time I had COVID.
Yeah. And I also forgot that sometimes folks with sjogrens can also have some neurological involvement. So it's common to have some sort of migraines. And I think learning about migraine can help people understand when they have headaches versus migraine, because migraine can really can be responsive to a whole different set of drugs. And so there's a lot of migraine that's like nausea and feeling uncomfortable and that kind of thing. That's not just headache. But I also have POTS, the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I'm so proud of myself for nailing that.
Yes.
That's again, like the same, like JV team versus varsity folks who have just POTS. I very much hats off to them for the way they live their lives. Mine is much more mild. And it was easily resolved by just being really careful about sleep and movement. I mean, salt and movement on sleep is also helpful. So, and I mentioned POTS because a lot of folks who have some of the inflammatory arthritises have an overlap with that and don't know, like, why am I feeling dizzy? Why, that kind of thing. So it's another one to look into.
And yeah, I only recently learned actually that also people with any form of inflammatory arthritis or autoimmune forms of arthritis, like rheumatoid or axial spondyloarthritis, also are more likely to have migraine to begin with. So
Oh
I didn't
yeah.
know that. Yeah, no one knows if it's causal or just correlation. And so that's something I learned from creaky joints.
And I love creaky joints. And one more thing, which is the inflammation from the axial spondylitis and from sjogrens. Like a prolonged period of inflammation can affect how your thyroid hormones become converted.
Oh,
And
right.
so when you have a interference with the conversion of one hormone to another, that can lead to hypothyroidism. It's your thyroid can be functioning. It's like having a television on, but you don't have the right like converter to get the cable into the house. And that's called euthyroid. It usually only happens to people who are like in the hospital with, double pneumonia. But it's common, like 20% of folks who have RA can be euthyroid.
Wow.
And folks might not know it can be very dangerous to be hypo, an O, thyroid. It can affect your, how your heart works, et cetera. It also can make you really freaking tired and have brain fog. So I think that for me, I was lucky that I had someone who's a bit of a thyroid expert in my family, and that they were like, you know what, I honestly, I think all these symptoms are really lining up with thyroid. Let's get a full thyroid panel instead of just checking your thyroid. And when that happened, we could see consistently that one of my thyroid hormones was just well below what it should be, even with some supplementation. And then I finally have just gotten the exact right kind of, it's like just take the hormone that's not being converted. So that's also, I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about RA or any of the other rheumatoid arthritises is, that kind of inflammation can affect how the rest of your body functions, so yeah.
Yeah, there's this kind of this vague umbrella that you get told that there's systemic symptoms, but it's not. Usually, people refer to for rheumatoid arthritis the eyes. It can affect the eyes, lungs, and the heart. Those are the big three that are typically affected for systemic symptoms. But there's so many more, like you're saying,
Yeah.
thyroid. There could be, I mean, and endless. It's once, inflammation, one of the talks I went to at one of the conferences just stuck on my head. They said, inflammation doesn't like to stay in one place. It travels. So
Oh,
yeah, I thought that was just, I don't know
yeah.
why that just stuck in my head, but so inflammation might start in the joint, in your spine or in your periphery, like with rheumatoid arthritis, and my
Hmm.
little, MCPs, metatarsophalangeal joints, the knuckles, and then it travels throughout the body and, wreaks havoc. So, that's a lot. We were talking before we started recording about when you write a bio for yourself as a chronic illness patient, it's like, what's on my chronic illness resume? So you've had a lot of experience, healthcare
Yes,
experience, but
it's
I would
true.
love to hear more about specifically your diagnosis story. How did you get diagnosed with Sjogren's and with axial spondyloarthritis? I don't know, even though I know you, and I'm sorry I forgot. If I forgot, but which one came first? I think the axial spondyloarthritis came first, or
Well, so that was a moving target. So I had again, I have some medical folks in my family, and they had said, you really kind of seem like you have a connective tissue disorder. These are the some issues you have, but that's
Mm,
not my specialty. Kind of waxed and waned about stuff during the pandemic from like 2020. I had these symptoms that seemed really unrelated to me. Like one was I woke up in the middle of the night trying to figure out how I'd gotten something in my eye. So
mm,
painful, so distressing that my husband was like, "Do we need to go to ER?" And I was like, "For something in my eye?" Then I was sleeping. Like I can't understand what that was. And it was so bad. I remember I had to put off a call the next day. I had a call with someone fairly important, like a partner or something. And um I said, is there any way you can move this call from like 9:30 to 11:30? Because randomly I have this eye issue. And everyone was like, yeah, we don't care. I also had what I would call it just thirst. I didn't think of it as dry mouth.
mm,
But it would be really bad, and to the point where I would just like urgently need something with caffeine. Not caffeine, something with carbonation. So either like a really aggressively bubbly seltzer or like a Diet Coke. So we started just having that in the house because it would be these moments of just like stunning, like almost like an urgency that has almost like a little bit of panic to it with the dry mouth. And I
interesting.
had also, before the pandemic started, like in February into like late 2019, had gone back to the eye doctor and was like, my eyes are just really dry. Like, what am I doing? Oh, just use eye drops. Like, okay.
Mm,
Um, During the pandemic, not realizing this, I thought it was because we lived in a new house. I had a humidifier on at night. I had a humidifier on by my desk. So I
mm,
had these like dry eyes and this dry mouth, even with like, Florida conditions, like just as humid as possible.
mm,
And I don't think I knew enough about Sjogren's. I think I looked something up and was like, hey, what about this? And I was like, it just doesn't seem what do I know about this? I've never met anybody that had it, never talked about it. I had some other symptoms of Sjogren's that I went to a gynecologist for. And it was hard to line everything up because I don't think, as somebody who doesn't have medical training, I would have thought what's in common between your eyes, your mouth, and other parts of you. Um, I wouldn't have thought, oh, those are all part of like your mucous membranes. I never
yeah.
would have thought that that was together. I went eye doctor, like GP, why am I thirsty all the time kind of thing. I also had a weird rash that like stumped the chumps. Like no one could figure
Mm,
out what it was, which was very
yeah.
fun. So I had COVID twice. I had COVID in 20, um, I had COVID in December 2021, January 2022. Then I had COVID again,
Mm,
December 2022, January 2023. And both of those times were kind of knocking me down and I couldn't get back up. I would sort of slowly rise back up, but then got knocked down again.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
got I got something. I got some really bad virus, which I think we now think was a flare of Epstein-Barr, that my
Mm,
system was so beat up from COVID and I didn't take time to recover. And I was just really knocking on the door of being like, do I have long COVID? Is that what's
mhm.
happening? Like in March, kind of being like, I think I need to take some time off of work and just like sleep for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then there was just, I was working. I think I got a migraine was what happened. I was working, I got a migraine. I like stood up from my desk and was like super dizzy and just felt like I was going to faint the next day. one of my friends whose sister-in-law has POTS was like, you kind of sound like you have POTS. And I was like, oh, why would that just start out of the blue? And then that night I just couldn't swallow, couldn't chew, wasn't finishing my sentences. Things didn't make sense. I'm normally a pretty articulate person. I've worked on a lot of legal briefs. I even my claim to fame is I had a footnote in a Supreme Court brief for one of the iterations.
Okay. So
it didn't make it into the final.
I forgot to say this earlier, but that you're a lawyer by training.
I used to be.
Yeah.
I used to be a lawyer. Yeah.
In my mind, you're always a lawyer. Once a lawyer, always.
Yeah. Don't tell that to the bar associations.
Okay.
Yeah. But I had been working on a fairly complicated brief in a fairly, I don't know, well-known set of issues. And really weird, equitable arguments about clean hands, and no one cares except really weird lawyers. And within 24 hours, I was not able to finish sentences. And my husband took me to ER being worried that it was something like myasthenia grava, which starts head down and then can lead towards paralysis if you don't jump on it. We went first to urgent care because I was like, I'm not an emergency. And then urgent care was like, so nice. Off you go to urgent care. Yeah. Off you go to emergency room. They're like, that's cute. We can't help you. Go to emergency room. Yeah. And the resident I had was like, I really think you have an autoimmune disease. Let's run all these different tests. And it came back with a really high ANA. And I don't know how much people really talk about this, because there are lots of different reasons for someone to be sort of mildly positive in the ANA. But once you get above mine was 1 to 320, which has only a 3% chance of being related to something else. So it's like, you have some autoimmune disease. We don't know what it is. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
No help, no anything. Couldn't get into a rheumatologist, even on an emergency referral. Just kept trying to get in. I had 3 regular referrals and an emergency referral to finally get in with somebody. And it was going to be all the way in August. And it was May by the time we were begging. So it's really tough for people these days. It's extremely tough. So here I was sometimes couldn't get out of bed, really bad dizziness, vertigo, etc. By the time I did get into a rheumatologist, in my head, I believe what he did was look at my profile and be like, this is way too many weird things. I don't want to handle this woman. It's just going to be too complicated. This is the perception that I had. And he was like, I see neurological issues. Off you go to neurology. And it's a 9-month wait usually to get into neurology. However, one of the things he wanted to do was, because I had this really bad muscle pain, that he's like, that doesn't make sense, which I now understand was partially Sjogren's and partially enthesitis, which is, I think, something people with inflammatory arthritis, especially in the spine, it's really helpful to know that enthesitis is a thing. It's a thing that happens to a lot of people. It doesn't mean that you have some other condition. Anyway,
right.
We'll get to enthesitis.
And that is inflammation of the enthesis, which is where the ligament or tendon attaches to the bone. I'm reading this from online just to make sure I say it correctly, because sometimes my brain scrambles words. So it's the medical term for inflammation of one or more entheses, which is the site in which connective tissues such as tendons or ligaments attach to bones. And that's much more common, for whatever reason, in psoriatic arthritis and ankylosing spondylitis, axial spondyloarthritis than rheumatoid arthritis, but certainly can happen in any of the inflammatories.
Yeah. I think when I heard some help around that from the Reddit boards, it was usually in a psoriatic person, and they had a lot of help because it can really nail your feet. I remember waking up and being like, I haven't been doing anything. Why are my heels are so bad? And I worked retail and heels and ran marathons, and why do my feet hurt so badly? My feet hurt more than after I finished a marathon. And so there were some helpful tips about just figure out whatever shoe works for you and buy 3 of them is kind of the only way to go. So because I could point to my knee and say, it hurts from my knee joint up 2 inches. It hurts from my heels, and it was just really classic sort of pain. I had pain in my shoulders too, which can be related to the axial spondylitis and the ankylosing spondylitis. So, I had some muscle tests because they thought, oh, your symptoms are consistent with MS, which they were not.
Mm-hmm.
Just having muscle pain is not MS. I got very concerned about MS because it's a, serious and very frightening disease for a lot of people.
And if you're having headaches and eye issues too, those overlap. I mean, I was tested for MS also, actually 10 years after my diagnosis of RA, but long story short, it's not unusual to have to rule that out at some point.
Yeah.
No.
I was lucky enough that the MS test, which is this not super comfortable, like plug electrodes into your parts of your body and run electricity through it, that normally what you need to do is see the neurologist, do the test, and then have the evaluation. But the neurologist that I got, who's just a lovely man. If anyone is in Utah and needs a neurologist, I highly recommend Dr. Clark Mosier.
Okay.
He's was very smart and very fabulous. And he was like, let's put pause, have time, let's work through this, and explained to me, like, so that I wouldn't worry, like, what are symptoms of, MS, what it would feel like, how it would go versus what the symptoms that I had were.
Yeah.
And then he was able to help me with the vestibular migraine. He was very helpful and really helped me be more aggressive about it and understand why to be aggressive about treating migraine. So that sort of knocked MS out. And then I switched from one medical system, which was the University of Utah system, over to the private medical system, which was Intermountain Health, and got a really lovely rheumatologist there who had lots of smart ideas. The thing for me was that the blood test that I came back for was for mixed connective tissue disease. It was sort of in the mildly positive, kind of realm. Mixed connective tissue disease is where you have, I think of it as a poo-poo platter of like little appetizers, the poo-poo platter of all the connective tissue diseases, which is Sjogren's, one of the arthritises, whether it's RA, AS, psoriatic, pick your poison, and Raynaud's, and then usually one of the myositis, which can be your skin, it can be your muscles, it can be your internal organs. Because I didn't have a diagnosis of Raynaud's, people were ruling that out and sort of didn't know what to do.
Wow.
I now have a diagnosis of Raynaud's, which I forgot to mention. I sound like a red hot mess.
No, it's okay. I had that before. I always forget that I had Raynaud's, however we pronounce it, long before anything else. Like I have memories of playing soccer in cold weather and just my fingertips and my toes were just white. I mean, white is totally no circulation. Yeah.
So I'm a very pale person. I'm a remarkably pale person. I am paler than many folks who are from Ireland pale. And so I remember saying to my husband, how am I going to know if I'm white?
Like,
Yeah. Really white. Like, am I going to catch that? However, he had said to me, like, your hands are so cold. There's no way you don't have a connective tissue disease. Like, you must have Raynaud's. And I'd had it, like, one of the pediatricians had said something about me when I was a little kid about having toes, and my sister heard frosting toes. So it was like a joke when I was growing up about having, like, icicle toes, frosting toes.
Yeah.
So I now understand that I have Raynaud's. The Sjogren's test, the anyway, the 2 Sjogren's tests that they do, about 40% of folks who do have Sjogren's don't test positive on those things. So it was a little bit difficult to get a diagnosis, which is why I then ended up finally getting a biopsy when I had some other, sort of mouth issues. I had a salivary stone, I had a tonsil stone, I had inflamed tissue behind that. And I wasn't able to swallow. I had to PAM like pills. I was on a lot of, and you can hear it in my voice because it's usually not this bad. I had a lot of like swallowing issues. I had a lot of mushy food. I like figured out the 17 different ways you can eat bone broth to get some protein. Wow. And I think it was particularly bad. So when it comes to diagnosis, I think one of the things that I sort of needed to like own and accept was the idea that it really does take a very long time to get diagnosed. Not only because it's impossible, you have to get all these other specialists who can rule things out and get all these tests done, but it takes forever to get into the doctor to start all that process. And it's just really long. And I think especially for people who have a bunch of different stuff going on, maybe even people during the pandemic who just kind of weren't going to the doctor because if it wasn't that bad, let the doctor be for people who, really, that's sort of my mind was like, hey, my eyes are dry and I can't, I'm thirsty all the time. Is that really enough to go to the doctor during, the pandemic? Let the poor doctor, have their time. So I understand sort of a medical journey as there's the discovery phase and the treatment phase. And after you've gotten out of discovery into the treatment phase, you're kind of tinkering with what treatments you need. And I think really the biopsy that I had in May, it's June now, the biopsy I had in May was sort of the like, yes, we all agree that you have Sjogren's, it had been like all these ENTs and speech therapists had been like, you have Sjogren's, we can see it, but we can't diagnose you with it because it has to be diagnosed by a rheumatologist. So,
yeah. And sorry, keep going, continue. If you need to get some water, speaking of that, yeah.
Yeah, speaking of that,
I really think that, I will say for the record, I myself didn't know how systemic Sjogren's was. And actually there are thinking about changing the name. They, like medical entities, are considering changing the name just to systemic Sjogren's disease versus just Sjogren's, because your ability to swallow is such a primal life function that if that's disrupted, that is huge. And like you said, it's a mucus, it's the membranes of your entire body, not just your eyes and your mouth. That might be where you feel it, but it can be your genital area. It could be inside all of your organs. That affects digestion the entire way down the tract from the esophagus to the colon. This is such a major condition that is beyond dry eyes, that hopefully just you sharing your stories is helping people.
Well, and I think that's important too, because I had been to a variety of gastrointestinal specialists, and had ENGs and had colonoscopies and had all of these things because I had these like Crohn's-like symptoms, but they couldn't find the Crohn's. I was tested for celiac. I was tested for all these different things, and they just couldn't figure it out. And I now understand that was probably Sjogren's. I think
me too. Yeah.
The Sjogren's Foundation, which I hope you'll link in the notes. And I'm sorry to belabor this, but I think Sjogren's, the overlap between Sjogren's and the rheumatic arthritis is actually kind of high, right?
It is.
A relatively high. So
I don't know the number off the top of my head because Sjogren's is very underdiagnosed.
Super underdiagnosed.
But and I actually, if I look back, my own doctor has basically said like it's such a subjective diagnosis at this point that the last time I talked to her about it, because all my very first symptoms were GI, all 100%, like it was, and dry eyes. So that's actually what I was going to the doctor for before I was going for my quote unquote sprained finger, because again, I was triaging the sprained finger to which ended up, it actually was rheumatoid arthritis, my first joint symptom. But I went to all the GI doctors for, I got diagnosed with gastroparesis, which is delayed stomach emptying, which is part of autonomic nervous system dysfunction, which again, can overlap with things like POTS and can overlap with, people with RA are more likely to have autonomic nervous dysfunction. But to this day, I don't know if I have Sjogren's or not, because my doctor's it wouldn't really change our treatment plan. But to me, it would help me know, it would help me.
So I want to challenge that narrative for a minute, because that's what, and I think that's very common. I think that's sort of the conventional wisdom, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think that's how rheumatologists approach Sjogren's. I think ENT doctors, ear, nose, and throat doctors approach it differently, because the attacking your mucous membranes is not just like, oh, you have some dry mouth. It attacks your salivary glands and can do damage to your salivary glands that cannot be fixed. The salivary stone that I had, you could see on a CT scan. And they're like, wow, they said, it's not that big, but then they could feel it and be like, oh my God, that's crazy. I managed somehow to pass it. It was painful. It was, not comfortable when eating. I would sometimes be like, it's too much trouble to eat. Which is not great and not really life sustaining. But when I then went to have surgery, the really great surgeon that I had said, occasionally it'll pass before we can get your surgery scheduled. But, I think yours is so large, that's not going to happen. It did actually pass. That was actually a funeral, and I went to bite into a pistachio, and the saltiness of it just drove something out. And I was in so much pain, like eye-popping pain, I just happened to have one of the cousins, happen to be like a radiologist, and he's like, here's the things I think you need to do. And I was like, sounds great. And did them. And it really did help. It took a couple hours before I was like able to really kind of zone back in and not be distracted by the pain.
Wow.
However, you can have a salivary gland sort of collapse. So salivary stone is like a kidney stone. It's a buildup of, I think it's calciums maybe. And then it can get to a point where it can't pass through the gland that it needs to go through. And so just like a kidney stone, you try to do everything you can to pass it. And then if it can't, you have to have surgery. So I had surgery, which was pretty, sorry, I keep getting phone calls. I had surgery that was pretty minor. And they said, it can be that your salivary gland can collapse. Do you mind if we just stop for just a second? Because I am getting a couple different calls. I feel like most of the sjogren stuff that we're talking about, like, there has been some incredible webinars from the Sjogren's Foundation. And one of the things that they really hammer on, which is, well, whether we diagnose you or don't, the treatment is the same. Drink lots of water, use eye drops, have a humidifier. Well, but that's not great, because water is not the same thing as saliva. And if you're not saliva is an enzyme. So if you're not producing enough saliva, you could be having trouble breaking your food down, which then actually is a nutrition issue. So, instead of just saying drink lots of water, you can, suck on sour candies, like that can promote saliva production. I think you sort of frequently see me with a poppy in my hand, because
I love those. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really good. And I know they're currently in litigation about whether they have the health claims that they say they have. But for me, they're a little bit sour. And so a little sip of that does a lot more in terms of helping dry mouth than just like a seltzer, though they're delicious, and we can debate the merits of which one is better. But like, you need saliva to protect your teeth, not water. You need saliva to swallow things. So I think that's sort of where I challenge that narrative, because it is actually different. If you just sort of had dry mouth for a while because of your allergy meds, you would, drink water, sit by humidifier. But if you have something that's attacking your mucous membranes and then causing damage to them, like, you may want to interfere. I think this is sort of one of the things that I've heard you say about RA, which is like, RA is damaging your joints and you want to stop that. So while you may be able to sort of assuage your symptoms through a variety of lifestyle things like diet, exercise, etc., like, the damage to your joints is something that's really important to pay attention to. That's why, medication can be important. So for Sjogren's, like, one of the best things that I had to help was something called pilocarpine, which many people hate. People with Sjogren's are like, hello, I can swallow, I can create tears, I have enough moisture in my eyes to create tears. So pilocarpine helps a lot. I got pilocarpine from my dentist, and then asked an ENT to switch the script over, because dentists, it's a lot more cumbersome for them to write prescriptions. Dentists also will jump in on Sjogren's because they understand the damage that's happening to your teeth. ENTs are much more aggressive about it, because what can happen, in addition to like sucking on hard candies or sort of those sort of things, there's an inhaler that you can have. It's under your face, and you can inhale saline, and that can really help sort of preserve all that. So I understand that the conventional wisdom is sort of avoid medication and then do the lowest dose necessary. But for me, when I did get a script for Plaquenil, it's been a little bit over a month now. I mean, I was really quickly able to see how Plaquenil helped me. The muscle pain that I had went away. Some of my joint pain is better. Unfortunately, does nothing for my axial spondylitis. But that's what methotrexate and Humira are for. And but it, like, stomach issues that I'd had I think I started going to the doctor about them in like 2011, 2012. Those are almost entirely resolved. The weird rash I had, pretty much gone. And that's, like, in the span of a month, to have a lot of your symptoms be resolved by, the nice thing about methotrexate, at least for those of us that take it in pill form, like it's off patent. It's like $3 to get methotrexate.
That's what was so devastating when it was being, there was lack of access to it due to the whole legal issue with it also being used for pregnancy termination, that you're literally
Sure.
taking away the only inexpensive medication for rheumatoid arthritis. Like everything else, like you have a $3 methotrexate, or you have $40,000 biologics. Like there is not a lot of in between. But and you mentioned, the conventional wisdom being to not medicate.
Just to finish that thought, Plaquenil is off patent too. So Plaquenil is like $3. And it's those drugs. Methotrexate obviously has lots of side effects, and there's lots of reasons why people would not be able to stay on it. Plaquenil has some like serious like potential side effects for some people involving the eyes, but like to have that successful, in my opinion, of a medication. I mean, I suffered, just had none of the things that I like to do, which were like reading and knitting, like super exciting, homebody life that I have. Like I couldn't do those things. I didn't have the energy to like follow up with someone who texted me. So the loneliness involved with it was really high. So then once I started methotrexate, like overnight, I was like, ooh, I'm back to myself. And the same thing with Plaquenil, not quite overnight, but really quickly, I was like, hey, I can go for a walk without having gripping muscle cramps, So sorry, I just wanted to go that the Plaquenil is also off patent. Versus
so you're right. All the
Humira.
they're called like the conventional DMARDs, like sulfasalazine, disease modifying. DMARD means disease modifying antirheumatic drugs. So sulfasalazine, methotrexate, Plaquenil, they're in like the cheaper category. They're not as targeted to specifically the cells in like rheumatoid arthritis and other inflammatory arthritises. But no, I know you're preaching to the choir, to me, talking about medications, that basically talking about the wisdom of taking medications, that they're so effective. And I thought the conventional wisdom I had heard from sjogrens was that there simply weren't any medications available, that there aren't any that are targeted to the cells that are causing the disease. But it sounds like they're actually, what you just mentioned is a medication that can give you that can target, like if the disease process is causing you to not have enough saliva, and pilocarpine gives you saliva, then it's giving you an effective treatment, even though it's not treating the underlying cause as to why you don't have saliva.
Right. And so for me, pilocarpine also helped solve a lot of my stomach problems.
I'm literally going to talk to my doctor about this. If you saw me looking at my phone, I was literally adding it because I'm seeing her on Friday, and I have my little notes app because I'm like, this is exciting. Anyway, sorry, this is my story. We're here to talk about your story, but
pilocarpine also off patent.
Yeah.
So, for someone who has like, I don't even know if it's like, I used to have a friend who'd say like, I have enough issues to make up a subscription, like I basically have like a subscription edition, I've got the whole Martha Stewart collection of all the Martha Stewart livings, right? Like I have all of that. And to be able to have medication that, I have the thyroid medication, and I think both of those are relatively cheap. Like, so I have this little like handful of, magic potions that cost like $3, $5, whatever it is. And I also have Humira that was so much money that I called my insurance company and was like, hi, I have this bill here for $500. And I was just wondering what portion is mine and what portion is yours. And they're like, no, that's your portion. And I was like, oh, well, then what's your portion? And they said, it's the 5,500 that we're covering. And I was like, great. Can I make you some cupcakes, or would banana bread be more? Just keep covering that. Yeah, no, it is really expensive, and it's effective.
Yeah.
Right. All the biologics are effective, but man, I don't know. I remember stopping and thinking like, ooh, how do people do this?
Well, and now there's biosimilars, but they're only like, they're 90% of the cost. So they're really not. So once they got out of the, you're the lawyer, so I don't remember the names for all this stuff, but they're out of the patented phase or whatever, when only they can make the drug. Now you can have biosimilars, but it brought the price from 5,500 to 4,600. You're like, okay, great, a month. This is totally expensive. So, but I wanted to ask something before I forget, and before we move on to the next topic, which is, as somebody who has been, you're very highly, intelligent and very analytical, you have training in, specifically in the legal field to be able to be like, get to the heart of things. What was it like for you and how did you cope with all this ambiguity and lack of answers when you were going through this, what I definitely in your case would call a diagnostic purgatory, where you're like, it could be this, it could be this, let's refer to rheumatologist, you finally get there, then they're like neurologists, and then you finally get there, and then they're like, go back to the gastro, like, how did you cope? Or it's okay if you didn't cope in healthy ways.
I didn't cope. There was a lot of like screaming into a pillow. I think, like, honestly, like I think it's common, and I think we should talk about it more, that the grief, I think we talk a little bit about depression in terms of health things, but I think there's a grief period and you can get stuck in it. And I know, like, we had, in the last Room to Thrive support group, we were talking about sort of the hope roller coaster, where you start getting, every time there's like, hey, there's a new medication, you're like, I can't hope about it because I cannot have my heart broken again. I think for me, there was a process of just like, you literally are just sort of waiting. I think for me, part of the problem was because I had to let go of my job in May when we didn't know what was wrong with me. And very lovely partners were like, come on back as soon as you're ready. We'll take you 10 hours a week. We'll take whatever, which was enormously generous of them. I think was part of the like upside of the pandemic, is that a lot of employers were like, we're just going to have to figure out how to go forward with folks on a not 40-hour week kind of thing. And I couldn't even do 10 hours a week. Like, I couldn't focus enough to do like some really basic stuff. So because I didn't have a job, when people would ask me, and because I'm also like fairly articulate, people would assume that I was doing better than I was. So then when they would be like, well, you're not really having any problems, I'd be like, I can't unload the dishwasher. Like, I just want to be able to unload the dishwasher. Like, yes, I'm not going to go back to running half marathons or, 10Ks, but I'd like to be able to walk around the park. Like, I had to learn how to make it really concrete. And it took a while to understand I wasn't going to the doctor to get them to care about me. I was going to the doctor for very specific purposes. You, gastroenterologist, who's lovely, you need to help me with these esophageal things. I need to get this CT scan. I need to have a referral to ENT. You, NP, I need you to help me get more baclofen, because for me, and I know this is a difference between the axial spondylitis and the RA, like laying flat on your back is torture. It is the one thing I cannot do. I can go to yoga class and my back will feel better. And then you lay down in Shavasana and you go to get up and you're like days of pain from that. Right. So you have to sleep every night. Like, you can't sleep sitting up. So the backline for me helps me not wake up in pain multiple times a night, which then helps me live a life. But like understanding who's doing what and orchestrating that, it is like orchestrating a circus. It's a lot. Like, I project managed 8 people during the pandemic while we had multiple natural disasters. We had riots in Philadelphia where people were like stuck in my house because stuff's on fire, and you're still project managing all these people. And I was able to do all that. And I struggled to manage all these different people. And, I think I've said in other places, like, just managing your meds as to what's on 30, what's on 90, like, makes your head want to explode. It's a lot. And I think it's, like you've said, it's a job.
Yeah.
It's a job. You can learn it. You can figure it out, but it's a hobby that you didn't ask for.
If you have ever felt completely lost or utterly alone while trying to navigate real life with rheumatic disease, listen up. I am here for you. I created an educational program to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. And it's called Room to Thrive. After earning a master's in occupational therapy and completing hundreds of hours of additional training, I created a step-by-step guide to help you truly thrive with rheumatic disease. This is the only program I know of that's designed to improve quality of life for people living with inflammatory, autoimmune forms of arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, Sjogren's disease, and more. During the self-paced lessons, you'll learn how to manage pain and fatigue, cope with stress, navigate relationships, and continue doing the things that matter to you and bring you joy. The goal is really to help you improve your quality of life and learn how to thrive with your rheumatic disease right now, rather than waiting for a distant day when it might be cured or healed. I really created the down-to-earth, practical, heartfelt resource I wish I had had when I was first diagnosed at age 20. If you want even more in-depth support, you can join the 12-week Room to Thrive virtual support group, where you'll be surrounded by people who actually get what you're going through, people who will provide the encouragement, validation, and support that you deserve. Each group is expertly moderated, so you don't have to worry about the kind of misinformation that spreads like wildfire in the free-for-all social media groups. If you're on the fence, don't just take my word for it. Here's what Katie had to say in March 2023. I was lost and overwhelmed with my RA diagnosis. It felt overwhelming to know what to read, what to do, how to spend my energy trying to research on the internet. Room to Thrive did that for me. It's been like getting a crash course in my diagnosis along with a community who gets it. To see all the details, including the dates for the next support groups, go to the link in the show notes or bit.ly/thriveroom with a capital T and capital R. You can also just email me anytime at info@myarthritislife.net. And don't delay if you're interested, because each group is capped at 16 people or less in order to make a small, intimate group atmosphere. Thanks so much for your time, and I can't wait to get started with the next groups. And I can't wait for those of you who are interested in the self-paced option to go ahead and join that at any time. Bye-bye for now. And part of figuring it out is accepting that there's parts of it that are unfigureoutable. Like, there's this fun book by Marie Forleo, who's like a business coach person. It's like everything is figureoutable, which I love as a concept. And like, as a stubborn optimist, I'm like, I want everything to be figureoutable, but sometimes you're going to come against like systemic barriers that are simply out of your control, like the price of your medication, that kind of thing.
Well, but to answer your question about dealing with ambiguity, which is, so I think some people think, oh, lawyer, you do law, but there's actually a variety of specialties in law. And there's some people who do sort of all of it, and God love them. Hats off to you. You kind of specialize, like doctors kind of specialize, right? So if you go to an oncologist, they're pretty good on whatever organ system that they work on, but they're like, I don't really know rheumatology, or, they're not going to give you heart meds because they're like, you got to go to cardiology for that. I'm not a specialist. Mm-hmm. So if someone comes to me and they're like, I have this tax question, I'm like, oh, that's a troubling one. Can I help you find a tax lawyer? Like, I don't know. Often tax lawyers have additional degrees called an LLM. Same thing as like patent attorneys, like, I can't even touch patent attorneys because they have a whole separate bar exam they have to take.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh no. That's why they get paid more, and they should, because their jobs are hard. So for me as a litigator, everything was ambiguous. Like, everything was ambiguous. We were working on usually two sides to the same set of facts, sometimes three or four. I started off in bankruptcy as a clerk to a bankruptcy judge, doing corporate bankruptcy. So if you had, let's say you had one of the bankruptcies we had was the American Banking Financial Institution. I think that's at ABMI, something in that. It was one of the folks that were doing this sort of in the housing crash. They were securitizing loans and doing different mortgage loan lending. It was super confusing. But you had the company, right? You had them. You had someone from the United States trustee's office to make sure there was no sort of shenanigans going on and self-dealing. Then you had people who were representing all of the major creditors, right? So you now have three people in court who may have three different things that they need to have happen. Yeah. Then you can have bondholders. Then you can have customers. Then you can, like, it's not just one set of facts. It's a variety of people. Yeah. So I think because of that, my training was, and this is sort of my ultimate interest, when it comes to medicine, which is there's a lot of different opportunities for narratives. Like, I think we think there's like one story, there's one set of truth, and there isn't, right? There just isn't. I can tell you a story about a woman married to a a Hollywood star. She's always known for her red lipstick, gorgeous long dark hair, super gorgeous. Or I could tell you a story about somebody who was an international human rights lawyer who the Secretary General tapped to ask to work on a specific issue. Those sound like two different people. They're the same person. They're Amal Clooney, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing about the rheumatoid arthritis, which is if you're trying to put me in a bucket, I don't go in a bucket.
Yeah.
I have a variety of illnesses. And when I look at it, I look at here's the different symptoms. What do they fit in with? Because as a litigator, we're looking for what are all of the claims that can be brought, right?
Yeah.
One set of facts, you can have, like 16 different counts against you, right? Like apparently you can have 34 different counts each one based on a document. And that's the case against former President Trump. So my ambiguity, I'm just sort of used to it, right? But my approach to things and my research approach to things is like, what are the different facts? How can we rearrange them? And I don't think that's how medicine works, because they're looking for this bucket, that bucket, which are based mostly on what drugs will work, right? And that's what they need to do for their circumstance, and no judgment on them. But for me, it was difficult because my analysis of what was going into it was like, no, let's think about all the possible things that could happen, right? And I think that was the enormity of the frustration, was how much research I was walking into a doctor's appointment with, and being able to say, like, I had the blood test for ankylosing spondylitis because my dad had it, and so it's very inheritable. And the blood test that I had came back negative. So, okay, well, you don't have ankylosing spondylitis. And I was like, I just feel like maybe I was sure about that. And I looked into it, and there's an enormous amount of racial and ethnic diversity in whether that test is actually predictive. And I'm just say this out there, like for Black Americans, just on a racial basis, like zero, like they're very low on testing positive for that. And they usually have a much worse set of symptoms. So just, I can start getting very angry about that, because I'm certain that there are people who have had these diseases for a long time, have not gotten any help, probably especially Black women, just because they're so often, gaslit by the medical system. So I just think it's like, at some point I'm reading these medical journals that I barely can understand, and I can put together this system that's like, actually, ethnically, that's not true. My dad was Italian. I'm half Italian. So Italians have a lower rate of positivity on the ankylosing spondylitis, even though you can see it on x-rays. And like, I'm walking in saying that. I'm walking in saying there is actually medication that can help with sjogrens, and this is what we need to do. And so it's a fine line to walk, because you don't want to be the picky or
that's the thing. Like, because people ask me
patient.
when I talk about advocacy, they're always like, well, isn't my doctor going to say, well, you just use Dr. Google, or like, I'm the expert, you're undermining my authority. And that's just a tricky, complex.
So I happen to think anyone that's like, I have authority, when they're in a situation that's not immediately life threatening, like I'm concerned about that person and whether they're going to actually treat me properly in the long term. Versus someone who's like, man, that's really interesting. I don't think we're there at your treatment just yet, but let's keep an eye on that, and we'll move down the line with that. Right. Like that's a good point. I don't think you need that harsh of an intervention, because there's all these side effects. Let's put that in our back pocket, and we'll be able to move on. I think that threading the needle of like, I need to be very informed, and I can't be pushy. I feel like it's understanding that you're going to go in front of someone and you're going to ask them to do something, and you have to pretend you don't know all of it. My first appearance in court, the partner that I went with said, you're going to know all the answers to the questions that the judge is going to ask you. It was actually what the vice chancellor is going to ask you. You have to pretend that what they're asking you is a novel concept, because you've prepared. What are all the possible things I could ask? What are all the answers? And I literally had like tabs for like, if they ask this, there's this, case. And he's like, you have to pretend you don't know, because otherwise the judge is going to get sort of feisty with you. So I think there's a little bit of crossover between advocacy in a courtroom and advocacy with a doctor, which is I'm super prepared. I'm going to think of every question they're going to ask me. I sort of have an understanding of where I want to go with this. I want a referral to PT. I want a referral to pain management. What do I need for that? Who can I talk to who I already know? And I mean, I don't want to tell people to go look at Dr. Google, but man, Reddit boards are fantastic in terms of people saying their actual symptoms in ways that you can understand, lining all that up. And then when you go see the doctor, be like, what are the 3 things I need right now? Let's go over my test results or my blood test results. Let's talk about whether my medication needs to be tweaked. And then what I need to, whatever else it is. But like, that's it. You're not giving them a qualitative piece of information. It has to be quantitative. Like, this is what's happening based on my blood test. Let's go forward this way. And it's like, if you don't know to do that, if you think you're going to the doctor because they're actually going to help you and make you feel better, that's not the system that we have anymore. And that might have been true 20 or 30 years ago, but it really isn't. And they only have 15 minutes for you. So you have to pick and choose your battles. And you said that in the Room to Thrive training, which was, you need to find out how much time you have so that you can prepare. Yeah.
It's so basic, but like they never tell you how long you have. They just tell you that your appointment starts at 11:20. Well, how long do I have? 20 minutes? And how long do I actually have with the actual doctor? Like not including the medical assistant, because sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, you have 20 minutes, but they're including the medical assistant coming in, taking your blood pressure, all that stuff.
So a special trick is if you show up early and they actually can put you in a room and get started early, you sometimes get a little extra time.
Yeah, that's very good point.
If somebody canceled, if they're running, like the doctor would rather like get you done and get you moving, so that they don't end up running over, if by the end of the day, they're an hour late versus, that's the other trick, which is if you have the ability, always schedule in the morning.
Yes, yes.
You're 9 o'clock. There's only 7 people ahead of you that can make you late versus 3 o'clock. It's going to be, 45 minutes. So
yeah,
that was a special trick that I learned from a family member who's a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many follow-up questions I could have. But I wanted to acknowledge, I really loved your analogy earlier, and you're always good with words. That it's like managing your health. You didn't say managing your health, but you were referring to managing your health, and you said it's like orchestrating a circus. And that's, I'm kind of, as we go through these interviews, if I'm typing sometimes like potential titles of the episode, and I'm like, oh, it's like orchestrating. That is like a perfect way to depict like the mental load, the mental load and the logistics and the unpredictability of the symptoms. I love that. And then also threading the needle of doctor interactions. I love that one too. So yeah.
Yeah. And it is the same thing. Like you need to prepare for your doctor's appointment in a way that you can be very focused and just as like, if you're going to thread a needle, you got to have quiet or whatever it is, music or gum, whatever you need.
Get your game face on.
Yeah. Trying to be like, oh, I'm just going to roll in and do my best. Like that's not going to work. Like you have to find a doctor that's going to work with you. If you're prone to being like sarcastic and funny and you're with somebody who doesn't think you're funny at all, like you're going to be like, are they getting me? Are they hearing me? So yeah, which is, if you have the opportunity to switch rheumatologists, it's quite a luxury, but most of us don't anymore.
Unfortunately, yes, I know. It's like there's always best practices, like find a good fit with a rheumatologist. If you don't like the first one, get a second opinion. It's like it's just not feasible for everyone. But yeah, in an ideal world, these are good things to consider. I never even knew. I'm such a rule follower that I never would have thought to switch doctors initially. Do you know what I mean? Until I became more of a patient advocate. I'm just like, this is the one I have. Like it's like you go to school and they assign you a teacher. You don't like get to change. So. It's good.
So one thing that makes that easier for people if they're moving to a new city or if they're getting in, someone told me like you have a referral to a rheumatologist, make an appointment with a variety of people so that if the first one doesn't work, you can then go to the second one or the third one. If the first one works, you can then cancel and those people will not be mad at all for you to cancel. But if it's taking you 6 months to get into a rheumatologist and that rheumatologist doesn't work, it's going to be another 6 months to get into a different one versus it's 6 months to get into rheumatologist at health system A. It's probably the same amount of time, maybe even shorter to get into B and C and D and whatever. And the other thing I learned was if people are like, well, we don't take your insurance, you can say, I'll self-pay. And
Yeah.
self-paying isn't as expensive as you may think. It may only be $200 or $300. Well, if you need a rheumatologist that isn't making you feel gaslit, $300 sounds, pretty good.
Well, and you have the right to request a super bill from them, which just literally, and I do this with my my therapist, my psychiatrist. He is private pay only, but I get reimbursed 70%. So I pay him $225, get the credit card points, then submit. It's 2 documents. It's just 2 little PDFs. Hit my receipt that I paid and hit a super bill, which literally is a tiny little document that just says I gave therapy to her this day. And then I submit that just on an online portal to my insurance company, and then they literally deposit into my bank account. That's 70% worth it. So the out of network rate. So that's another. We're giving people lots of little on the ground tips.
But that's how I ended up. Most of the things that have helped have been things I've learned from other people, whether that's through Reddit or Instagram or on a support group or whatever it is. I kind of had to learn it wasn't going to be like one magic pill that was going to help. It was going to be 1,000 little things, right? Like it's one thing isn't going to make your life like, I don't know if you were in your 20s, you'd be like, once I do this thing, everything's going to be great. And like, it's not like that, right?
Yeah.
Once I graduate from law school, my life's going to be grand. Like, listen, I wasn't as poor as I was in law school. Like I could afford chicken, after law school, but like, it didn't make me feel like super self-confident like I thought it was going to. And I think that's the same thing you could get in and you're working on the meds and it can take a while to get the right medication, cocktail. And I think the things that helped me were, like whoever that poster was on the psoriatic board that was like, find what works, Birkenstocks, Hokas, whatever it is, you just got to figure it out and then only wear that. And that's my collection of Birkenstocks now, which is not necessarily my fashion choice, but you do what you got to do.
You got to adapt. I'm a Hoka's girl, for sure. But I like Birkenstocks too. But I love that it's not one magic pill. It's 1,000 little things. And for some people, I was actually flabbergasted when I reviewed the research and found that 50% of patients who just have one diagnosis, and that one diagnosis is rheumatoid arthritis, 50% do go into remission on methotrexate alone.
Wow.
And I was shocked because again, I being active on social media am not necessarily exposed to a representative sample of the average patient. If you just get this diagnosis and you go and the first treatment you try is, inexpensive, and the majority of people do tolerate methotrexate fine. Like there are definitely some that have really bad side effects, so bad that they have to stop it, but the majority don't, according to the latest research I'm aware of. So they are not having to do a lot of management. This is they just take this medicine. But a lot of people, it's more complicated, or maybe methotrexate works for 5 years and then it's not enough anymore. Then you got to add a biologic and then your body changes,
Well, and that's true for axial spondylosis too. There are people who just take they take one of the COX-1, COX-2 inhibitors and they go on their merry life. Like they're okay. They just take this sort of beefed up anti-inflammatory. But that made me violently ill. Like I was so much pain from my stomach because I can't. And I said to my rheumatologist, like, I can barely even take Advil. I don't know how we're going to take any of these other things. Meloxicam is what I'm trying to think of. So I can't take meloxicam regularly, but if I have something really gnarly happening with my back, I can take one, or that sort of thing. So, but some people just take meloxicam and they go on with their life and they're so happy and it works great for them. And God bless them. That's not me.
They're probably not the ones listening to the podcast.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, which is like, if you got one drug and you went on your life and you saw your rheumatologist every, 3 months, you're not going to be looking for like, help me, someone please help me. Yeah.
And that was, I often do say, like, that was me when I was on methotrexate plus Enbrel the first 6 years. I actually found an old blog. I'd forgotten I had a blog on, like, it was either like Blogger or Blogspot. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I wrote anything about having arthritis. And I didn't write a single thing. And I don't think it was because I was like afraid of a stigma or anything. It was just like literally just not a huge part of my life at that time. So that is good to remember. But back to the group of people who are,
Sorry.
having more of a, let's just say, like, there's an old Japanese curse my friend Paul likes to refer to. There's an old Japanese curse, may you live an interesting life.
Yeah.
This is may you have an interesting health journey. So I would
Yeah.
love to, before we get to the rapid fire, I would love to just hear a little more, what I honestly don't know the answer to this. What made you want to join the Room to Thrive, educational support group, as I call it? And, how has that community helped you?
think I think I had figured out the arthritis, the inflammatory arthritis, because I quizzed my mom about my dad stuff.
Mm.
And that led me down, is it psoriatic arthritis or is it, ankylosing, and sort of where that was going. And I think that you did a webinar on stress. And
Yes.
you said in it, cognitive behavioral therapy, like, let's reframe this. Let's think about this in a positive way. Like, it doesn't work if you have an active disease process.
Mm.
It's acceptance and commitment therapy, which is like, this is happening. What do I need to do to work on it? And that was like, you would think, as a relatively smart person who reads a lot, like, you would think that I would have like gotten that, like, owned it in my brain. And I 100% didn't. And it was like a glow stick moment where you like break a glow stick and it, like, the chemicals combine and they change and they light something up and they're never the same again. You can't put them
Wow.
back into their bits again. And I remember thinking that, like, oh, this makes so much sense. And I need to go to a specific community to ask the specific people. Like, having someone tell me, like, the pain that you're experiencing is because you're stressed about pain. And I'm like, that's probably true. That's probably true. I get stressed because I can't work, because I can't sit in a chair. Like, that is probably adding to my pain, but like, it's not pain related to a specific injury. It's not, how the neurology created it. So I think for me, when I got to that point, I was like, okay, I need to go find sort of my tribe of people who can answer what I need.
Mhm.
And I looked at what the components of the Room to Thrive program was, and it made me realize, like, ooh, this is going to make what I called my DIY RN process, like, do it yourself, like, registered nurse that you have to do to be able to advocate for yourself. I was like, this is going to speed that up and make that a lot less stressful.
Yeah.
And like, it really did. I think also there's a self-pacing aspect to it, which for me, having really, like, the fatigue was really gnarly. Like, there was no way I was going to be
Yeah.
able to do something that wasn't like, I can get to this, I can't get to this kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's why I dug into that.
Well, and I'm really glad that you mentioned the stress management webinar. That was just a free webinar I did in the fall of 2023. But it was exactly, we were talking about saying, what are chronic illness specific stress management tools? Like, and why do these traditional kind of general stress management tools like CBT, where CBT reframing, or like, is this a distortion? Am I catastrophizing? Like, the question of, are you catastrophizing your pain, is unanswerable when you have a chronic ongoing illness. Like, it literally does take years off of your life. Like, people who have rheumatoid arthritis have if it's uncontrolled, have like a 7-year reduction in lifespan. So are you telling me that, like, that's catastrophizing, that it is actually a life or death issue, in the sense that it's, deeply affected my life? So how do you, like you beautifully said, acknowledge that, yeah, stress does cause suffering, or can, the stress that you have is very valid, and it can exacerbate existing, pain and fatigue. But how do you wrap your head around the actual reality of, like, the unknowing, the lack of certainty, uncertainty, as we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
And that's what, for me, you said that, you hadn't got it through your quote unquote, like, your thick head or whatnot. I mean, I had weeks of therapy one-on-one before I could wrap my head around acceptance and commitment therapy. So I'm actually always pleasantly surprised when someone can, like, kind of have that glow stick light bulb moment just in the course of, like, a
Well,
workshop.
and I think it's a bigger thing too, because I feel like the sort of popular psychology is very much like, it's not even the, like, positive thinking, the toxic positivity,
Yeah.
but like, the popular psychology is like, well, this is how you react to things, and this is how you live your life in this way. And it's not helpful. It is not helpful to say to someone who has, a significant, impairment in their daily life, like, well, look on the bright side. Like, okay, cool. Tell me what the bright side is about not being able to lay down flat to sleep.
Yeah.
Like and I can tell you different parts of my life that, I can use this experience to grow in ways that I've already articulated that I want to grow. And I can use it like, free compost or something. But I don't think that like, it's sort of, you have to figure out, it's sort of like you went to a different college than your friends who stayed in, your town. And like, now your experience is different. Those people may not be able to really help you in your professional career in the same way. And you kind of pick and choose what you say. But I don't remember if I said this to my therapist or if my therapist said it to me. He thinks I said it, but it may have been him. But I said, if you're cold, you don't learn to shiver better. You learn to put on socks. And I think that's the thing, is that popular psychology is like, let's talk about resilience. And like, yeah, I mean, the resilience is, and let's talk about it, but don't learn to suffer more. And I think when you have a chronic illness, you think you're winning or you're whatever when you're like suffering through it or pushing through it. And that's not all that's going to do is take all the joy out of your life. Instead, if you learn, like, look, I could suffer through like super painful shoes, and I would love to because I love, everything fashion, but I could also just be like, all right, well, if I'm stuck in Birkenstocks, I'm going to make them like silver and rose gold and, what ones have flowers on them, and just find a way to make them feel like myself. And I think that's sort of the key to like staying with the folks who sort of speak your language in that way in terms of the pain, which is like, who can help me find socks? Like who's going to help me get that? Versus who's going to think, and not from a negative place, but who's going to think that they're helping by trying to teach me how to shiver. Like, that's not like, it's not, I'm not creating the problem myself. It's already there, and I need to figure out how to do it.
That's a really fascinating analogy. Like, I feel like part of it makes sense. The other part of me is like, there's also moments where, or at least I'm trying to apply it to ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, where we say, like, sometimes you put on the socks and you're still shivering, and like, there isn't a it's not a solvable problem. And so how do we learn how to cope with that, and not just in a way of like gaslight ourselves into thinking it's great to shiver, but to say like, okay, this is painful, like suffering is part of life. And then what can I do within the confines? Like, I've tried my solving tools, and I've reached the maximum amount of solving I can do on this problem. And then can I still have a meaningful life, a thriving existence, however you choose to define that, with the pain, with the suffering that's remaining, given that there's nothing more to be done. That's so hard to do on your own. I find it a lot easier to do in community, with others.
Well, and also you might hear someone say to you, like, look, if you're really cold, maybe that's not the room for you. Maybe there's a different place to be, and that might not be something that you would have even thought of as a solution,
That's really, really true. Yeah, you turn the temperature up.
Yeah. But you might not know that that's an option until you're with somebody who has more experience or just a different life view. Like, that's why I think personally, one of the nice things, I mean, I've only been here for, 2 weeks, but like living in a place that has more, either racial diversity, religious diversity, or whatever it is, people with a different perspective on life than you are going to handle like situations differently, and then maybe able to offer solutions to you that you wouldn't come up with, which is why it's really nice to be outside of your bubble, because your bubble can only offer so much. And like when you have something that is life altering, like a rheumatic issue, like you need every single, like, would you ever be in a situation at work where you're like, okay, this is really bad. We're in the like no bad ideas phase, right?
Yeah.
How are we going to get out of this? No bad ideas. And I feel like, ooh, can we press pause real quick?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Okay.
I have no idea what I
We were
was
saying
saying.
something smart and then we got interrupted. This is a real moment
Mm,
of brain fog, and we were going to
hmm.
accept it with our acceptance and commitment therapy and understand that we may never
Yeah.
recover that thought that
I don't
just flowed
know
away.
if like just on the brain fog for one quick minute. I don't know what you do,
Please.
but when I do have a thought and I know brain fog's happening, man, do I email that to myself as fast as
Oh,
possible. My phone is always on me. I have a billion emails that I send myself. I once accidentally
no.
sent my sister something and she was like, why do I care about dog vets in Nashville? And I was like, oh, that's for me. Sorry.
No, and that's why
Yeah.
in the middle of this recording, I literally added something to talk to my rheumatologist about to my little notes. Because yeah, it's we have to write things down. That's what we call an OT, occupational therapy. We call it a compensatory strategy. So if you're
Yeah.
not able to fix or solve your problem of brain fog, you can compensate by having external supports, like same with ADHD,
Yeah.
reminders on the phone, stuff like that. Oh, one thing I wanted to say, because I put this in the show notes already, is you mentioned the or way earlier. Sorry, I'm just adding this in before we go to the rapid fire questions. But you mentioned, that people, Black women especially have been often like not underdiagnosed with many rheumatic diseases. I remember
Well,
actually, oh yeah, go on.
so I think my point was Black women in general are underdiagnosed with every illness. But
Oh
I
yeah,
think
that's true. Yeah.
rheumatic is probably part of that too. I don't have any support for that particular standpoint. I just know when it comes to pain and people believing pain, people in general, medical practitioners, women and men, and people of all varieties of gender, disbelieve women's expression of pain. Um, it's not like you go to a women doctor, the women
Yeah.
patient gets believed more. It's a major issue in medical malpractices. They're just not listening to people's pain, but it's significantly bigger in different races than white. And I think the worst is Black women. It could be there's a breakdown in other races and ethnicities too that I just don't know about. I can do a little research on that and get back to you.
Well, and one really positive example of, change on a systemic level is that this was recognized as an issue in the American College of Rheumatology. Specifically, they tackled it in 2021 with the lack of representation of skin. They call it skin of color, meaning
Okay.
so one of the if you look at the textbooks, one of the classic symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis, well, what will it say? Red,
Oh
tender,
yeah.
swollen joints. Right. Well, if you
Yeah.
are white as a sheet, like I am, because I am like
Yeah.
my ethnicity is all Irish and British. There is no other thing in there. My brother and sister have bright red hair, So it's, yeah, to me, on my skin, it's red. But if you have black skin, dark brown skin, it is not going to look red. So they started this skin of color kind of initiative where they added to their American College of Rheumatology image library for specifically like skin conditions like psoriasis and psoriatic
Yeah.
arthritis. But it's a start.
Yeah.
So that's
That's really it's super interesting because granuloma annulare, which is a rash that has like a it looks like a burn and that kind of grows out. Um, you see it on me because it's red. It's bright red. It looks odd. It looks like I have some sort of, burn or something. And then it comes and goes with prednisone, which is how you know it's inflammatory.
fun.
And
Yeah.
it's very common for that to start right before sjogren starts. So I would
Mm.
think the ability to perceive the difference if you have more I'm going to say this so wrong and you're going to edit this later. It's melanation in your skin.
Yeah, melanin. Melanin.
Melanin. Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. If you have more melanin in your skin, you might not have the difference in contrast between the red of the
Yes.
granuloma annulare and the color of your skin. So yeah, I mean, I'm a white woman. This is not my issue to sell, but just
Mhm.
trying to be aware of the fact that, this is a problem in the healthcare system that, we all kind of need to own.
Yeah, and I mean, like the first, the low hanging fruit, so to speak, would be things that are extremely visible, like your skin, but
Yeah.
and having representation of skin of color in the textbooks, in the diagnostic supports that physicians have. But then it's much deeper and much more difficult, but extremely important to get to that. What about those mental, psychological, stereotypes that people have about, pain tolerance and women's pain and pain in people of color, non-white individuals. How are we going to tackle that? I don't know, but it needs to happen,
Well, I think there's also a lot of gender and work related in rheumatoid diseases as well, because it
Yeah,
used to be, oh, no women get ankylosing spondylitis. Well,
that's
that's
right.
because work was physical. So men who couldn't work would then go to the doctor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
rheumatoid is generally your periphery, it's generally your hands and your feet. And women's work was with their hands.
Mm-hmm.
So there probably have been men with rheumatoid arthritis since the dawn of time, but because their work, and I'm using air quotes, like their
Yeah.
work was much bigger, more physical. But if a woman can't take care of a baby or hold a baby, do wash, cook, that kind of thing, they have to go to the doctor. Whereas if a man can't do stuff with their hands, maybe not as much doctorish.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think how we work and how we think about what illness is, because I spend a lot of time thinking about what is illness, what is wellness, not related to work. Like you
Mm.
are ill when you can't work. Like, can I not be a human being who's ill and I can still work or never was working or work
Mm-hmm.
in a different capacity? Like, and I think that the focus that we have on defining illnesses that's based on productivity when it comes to work, it's very like industrial revolution, like everyone's supposed to be a robot working for the exact same amount of time in the exact same amount of
Yeah.
way every single day, but you only sort of fall into the lump of illness such that you can get medical attention when you can't work, you can't do this, you can't do your other thing. And I think that's
So
why
true.
you find that like more women are being diagnosed with axial spondylitis now. More men are being diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know what the breakdown is for psoriatic arthritis. I
I
think
don't
that's really hard to get diagnosed with, as I understand it. Like just really
Yeah, I think
rough.
and I think there's a genetic component to some of these where they might be more likely to affect, overall women are more likely to have any sort of autoimmune issue, and scientists are still trying to figure it out. But you're so right. That should be a whole other episode title of like about our whole episode topic of work and productivity and how your worth is not defined by your productivity and all that good
Well,
stuff.
and I think also women talk to women about their health issues. So
Hmm.
women will talk to other women who will then say, my grandma had that and she had rheumatoid. Like how
Yeah,
I got
yeah.
into the vestibular migraine was that two women asked me, like, do you have many ears? And I was like, I don't know what that is. I don't
Huh?
think I have it. And then
Yeah.
the
Do I have who?
differential diagnosis for many years is vestibular
Hmm.
migraines. And I was like, I haven't had a migraine in 3 months. That's really weird. That's not right. Let me start tracking this. So, but if you're not in a health conversation with people of a different, I'm saying women and men, but I also mean, gender non-binary people, and gender fluid people. But if you're not having conversations about health with people of different genders, you're not going to think that you're not going to look into that. You're not going to think, oh,
Right,
axial
right.
spondylitis, because the women in your world are only talking about, rheumatoid or, psoriatic. So, I think that underlies some also of how people get diagnosed, because I feel like in today's day and age, which is caused by the insurance companies, not by the doctors, but we have so little information and so little access to people that we're having to share stories again. And we're into that,
Yeah,
like, hey, this was my symptom, that's your symptom, this is what's happening. I went to this doctor, you went to that doctor. And it's incredibly important to be sharing these stories.
yeah. I think that's why people are like, oh, get off social media, it's toxic and everything. I'm like, I can't get off social media as a healthcare patient. It's too important. Like,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
definitely there are parts of it that are like a cesspool and unhelpful, but
Yeah.
overall, it's such a crucial tool to be. It's like I say that social media is like a giant waiting room. Like you're waiting for the rheumatologist, you're chit chatting. It's the same. So, well, we do have to just time wise, and I'm first of all, I'm
Yep.
so grateful that you're able to record this in the middle of your move or right on the heels of, your move in progress. What are your best words of wisdom or anything you want to share to somebody newly diagnosed?
I don't know, because I'm still in that kind of newly diagnosed. I
Yeah.
think some of it is to sort of no matter how hard you're trying, like it's not a slow process because you're not trying hard enough, I think is what I would say. Like, I'll just repeat it because I kind of switched in the middle.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going slowly because of something you're doing. It's going slowly. Like, I kept thinking if I work harder, do something different, or read more, and like, that it would go faster. And it just doesn't. It just wipes out the time that it wipes out.
Yeah.
And that's
I
how it
want,
goes.
I often tell myself, it's not hard because you're doing it wrong. It's hard because it's hard.
Mhm.
It just is. And so that very congruent with that. Do you have a favorite arthritis gadget or tool in your toolbox, physical or metaphorical?
I was actually thinking about this because you mentioned that. And I'm always like, my heating pads. And I have a specific heating pad that I like, and I have three of them, and one travels with me when I have to go places. Um, then I was like, I do love my heating pads. And you have to get the flexible kind that turn off because otherwise you can burn yourself or hurt
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
And I'll send you a link to the one that I use the most from Amazon because it's really cheap. It's like
Perfect.
$15 or something. And I
Oh,
do have
love
three
it.
of them. One in the bedroom, one in the office, one in the living room. And I unplug and move them around with me. And I have to shoo the cats off of them, but they are mine. But you know what the other one is? I mean, you mentioned social media, and I think that's really helpful. The other thing I've learned is podcasts and books on tape. Because if you're in a place where like you can't really concentrate, uh, a book on tape is great. You can, like, if I have a really bad migraine, I can't see anything. So I can't really watch television, but I can listen to I listen to a bunch of, we call them my nerdy Supreme Court podcasts, but I listen to a couple different nerdy Supreme Court podcasts.
That's so
And
fun.
that's engaging enough if I have to lay down and put something over my face. Like, that's making me not feel like I'm just in the pain cave.
Oh,
So podcasts and books on tape you can get through Libby, which a lot of people, if they have a
yes.
library card, you can get audiobooks. You can like check out an audiobook. So it can even be, podcasts are usually pretty free.
Yeah, they are
Um,
usually.
and I do think like there was a knitting podcast by Andrea Mowry that I had been listening to because it's lovely and it's thoughtful and it's engaging, and she's just a very positive person. And so in the midst of like, I don't feel good, I'm moving, I'm stressed out, I'd be like, I'm just going to put on a little happiness for 30 minutes
Yeah.
and then I'm done. And like, it is like, if you can't change your thoughts, maybe you can sort of bombard yourself with um, somebody else's thoughts for just a brief moment. So it's a weird hack, but it is like, I do love the audiobooks and the podcasts and the all that kind of
I
stuff.
love that we're in the generation where we still call it books on tape. I remember
Oh,
checking out from the library. I read The Endurance, Ernest Shackleton's story of, being stranded in Antarctica. I listened to that on CD. So I had this
oh my
big
gosh.
stack of CDs and I had my little Discman and I would walk around listening with my headphones. Yeah.
That's right. It's
Yeah.
Audible. They're Audible books,
No,
right?
it's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
audiobooks. It's perfect. On the same kind of note, do you have a favorite book or movie or show you've been watching recently?
I love to watch different design shows, and there's one that I've been watching called Happy to Be Home. I
Oh,
think it's one of the Magnolia Network, one of the Chip and Joanna Gaines folks.
yeah, yeah.
And it's very colorful, very colorful. I
Uh,
mean, really high contrast, and I like it. There was another one with a muralist and a graffiti artist, and they just did lovely things, and they're very like the British baking shows where you feel
yep,
positive
yep,
and good
yep.
about life afterwards. It's like that, those kinds of shows, but with color. And
I
I
love
do,
it.
I love all the British baking shows too. Um, I have a book of the month subscription, and you can
Oh,
also get audibles to that. I have yet to get a dud from book of the month. Every single one of them. One, I was like, I like it, could have been edited better. 4 stars. Everything else has been 5 stars. Every
wow.
book I've gotten from them has been out of sight. I get hard copies of books because then you can donate them
Oh,
and they can
nice.
keep doing good as you go along. But there's lots of good reasons to not get them. And they did start an Audible program. So book of the month's like $20 a month.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. I
You
used to do that for
get lots
myself.
of books.
Yeah, that's great. Two more. Do you have a favorite mantra or inspirational saying?
I think I have two. One I got from Reddit that I cannot figure out where this person said it, but they said that they tell themselves, do less more often.
Oh.
And
That's a
it
good
really
idea.
helped. It really helped me be
Yeah.
like, that's the plan. I think the other one when I learned it a long time ago, I think when I was like, you know, in 2005, when all the money caught on fire, it was not a good time to be a corporate attorney.
Hmm.
And things were a little rough. And I think I've read something like a catalog that said, everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that one. I love that one. Last one. What does it mean for you to live a good life and thrive with chronic illness?
It's a tough one, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you like, that's the elevator pitch problem, right? Like, how do I
Yeah.
describe what my health issues are to you in 15 seconds, right? Like, how do I know what a good life for myself is, especially having gone from like literally billing, tenths of hours to think about productivity or to think about how am I influencing the world to move it forward in a good direction. And at the end of the day, it comes down to that like amorphous, like enjoying. Am I
Yeah.
enjoying my life? And that's the like, get the fancy tea, you know? Like, yeah, sure, you could get the $2 tea, but like go get the $9 tea because that's gonna make your life a little nicer. And I
Mhm.
think it's really, you know, prioritizing people, prioritizing enjoyment, like
Yeah.
getting it where it's at. I think when I used to run, there was a runner who said, when you're coming back from an injury, don't go back to what you were doing if you were a distance runner or speed runner, go do something different. And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think figuring out how to live with, a chronic illness is like, don't try to go back to your old life because you're
Yeah.
just going to compare. So, and that's one of the reasons
Mhm.
I don't try to practice law anymore. A, because I'm just unreliable as a human. Like I never know what's going to happen. And I know there's other people who can do whatever they want to
Yeah.
do, but like I'm a red hot mess of autoimmune stuff. So, what do I do that works and helps? And like, what does work look like? What does life look like? Am I just the person who gives you lots of good book recommendations? That's still a decent life.
You are amazing at that.
I do have a
Seriously.
lot of books.
Yeah.
I do like
Yeah.
to read.
And no, and I think I definitely know I'm asking like a basically impossible question to answer. What does it mean to thrive with rheumatic disease? And I think my answer changes every day too. So I do
Yeah.
love I have enjoying life. I do have my Leslie Nope. Treat yourself.
I
Treat
love
yourself.
it.
Leslie Nope. She's like my kind of hero. I was joking the other day, but we need to have like Leslie Nope is the main character of Parks and Recreation. If you don't know, it's amazing show. But she's very passionate and very productive and loves people a lot. But yeah, she actually it wasn't her idea to treat yourself, it was Donna's. But anyway.
I think I think the term for what I'm trying to say is like savor. Like when you're in
Savor,
an
I love it.
experience, really like talking to yourself about how great the experience is. Like if we went, I used to run with my husband, we used to run a lot with my husband, like 10
Mm,
miles. And today
wow.
we just went for a really nice, like in between a walk and a hike. All the whole time I was like, look how great these ferns are. And that dog is really beautiful. And, this is the weather is incredible. It was really nice out. And, then we went and had a really nice little breakfast where I had a super great little breakfast scramble. And like, just really when you're having something that's enjoyable, being like, wow, this poblano pepper was smoked perfectly. And I love how they put the sour cream on this. And like, just really highlighting what's happening as it's happening, and
Sounds like
really just sinking into that so that your brain is set up to think about the negative to protect you, but like really making it a practice to dig into the positive.
I love what it really sounds like the essence of mindfulness, which is like, awareness and presence in being present in the present moment, which is hard to do.
A little different because mindfulness asks you to sort of step out of something that's happening and think about how you're experiencing it, like being mindful. Being embodied is feeling it and really
Mm.
allowing yourself to feel it and allow yourself to like lean into the feeling of it. So it's a similar related concept. And I think being embodied can help you then, be more
Yeah.
mindful.
Yeah.
Um, but we don't have to always think about how we're feeling. Sometimes you just feel. And I think
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the key. Yeah.
Yeah, I once I'm still kicking this around in my head, and then we'll wrap up. But there was a TikTok video with a psychologist, and he said the opposite of anxiety isn't feeling peaceful, it's being present. And I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
whoa, that
Oh,
hits
sure.
home, is my anxiety is always about the future. So when I'm present is actually truly present. I'm not worrying about the future, anyway, so that's how I apply it to me. But I love that concept. If you can't run, enjoy the walk. It's kind of
Yeah.
the example with
Yeah.
you and your husband. That's beautiful. Well, and I'll put links to everything we talked about in the show notes, and you can find Maggie on ms.maggie.makes on Instagram. I
Mhm.
love that. And just thank you so much for taking the
And
time to share your
Substack.
story. And Substack, yes.
And Substack. Yeah.
MaggieRussell.substack.com.
Yeah. I write about illness and faith and birds and a whole thing on Tim Gunn, but that's for another day.
Project Runway. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I got to read that one. I'm behind. All right. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye for now. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Arthritis Life Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Room to Thrive, an educational program I created from scratch to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. You can go through the pre-recorded course on your own, or you can take the course along with a support group. Learn more at the link in my show notes, or you can always go to www.myarthritislife.net. And if you like this podcast, I would be so honored if you took the time to rate and review it. I also encourage you to share it with anyone you know who might benefit from it. I also wanted to remind you that you can find full transcripts, videos, and detailed show notes with hyperlinks for each episode on my website, www.myarthritislife.net. If you have any ideas for future episodes, or if you want to share your story or wisdom on the podcast, just shoot me an email at info@myarthritislife.net. I can't wait to hear from you.